Just to give context, I'm here in Central Library, and I've got the great opportunity to have a conversation with Julian Edge, who's been in education, and I get to pick his brains, and we get to hear more about what he's done in education and his thoughts on education. Hello, Julian.
Well, Alex, good to be here. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the coffee.
My pleasure.
Let's hope the pickings are not slim.
Well, uh, where do we start? Tell me what drew you to education?
Happenstance.
Mm-hmm.
I stumbled into it rather than being drawn to it. I graduated from university in 1969 with not much idea of what to do, and applied to the United Nations Association volunteer scheme to work as a volunteer abroad, and they sent me a form saying was there any kind of work that I wouldn't do, and I said, I'll do anything except teaching. And they promptly gave me a post teaching English at the Teacher Training College at Amman in Jordan, which wasn't entirely happenstantial because I did Middle Eastern studies and Arabic at university. And I discovered quite quickly, and to my amazement, that this question of how you get other people to, how you teach a language is absolutely fascinating. Having done the usual, 7 years French, 6 years Spanish at school and got good marks, but was completely unable to communicate, in those languages. That being the style of the day. I don't suppose it's changed that much. Perhaps it has. Anyway, so after the time in Jordan, I came back to England, did my teacher training, did a teaching diploma, Cert Ed, at Manchester. And then I sort of ping-ponged for the next 12 years or so between going abroad and teaching English. And each teaching experience would bring up a series of questions that I couldn't answer, so I'd come back here and do another qualification. So it went, Jordan, teaching diploma, then Germany for a year, Egypt for 4 years, and back to do an MA, and then Singapore for 2 years, and Istanbul for 3 years, and then back to do a PhD. And then a job came up at Durham University, and I thought, well, I've never actually taught in this country before. I could give that a whirl. And found myself teaching on an MA course. And at that point, apart from the business of how you teach other people a language, it was becoming more and more apparent, again, completely unexpectedly, that being involved in this field allowed you to open windows into all sorts of areas that I'd never thought about, of philosophy and psychology and international politics and power relations and, as I say, all sorts of things. It was just fascinating. And so I carried on in that vein. University of Durham, then University of Aston, then a year in Australia, and then here, Manchester. Sorry, that wasn't just how I got involved. That's more or less the whole story. Until 2011, a letter came around to say that the university was even more in debt than they thought, so they needed to save a few more £1 million, and one obvious way was to invite people to take early retirement. I was 63 at that point, and I had intended to work through to 65, but the offer they made was either you can work your next 2 years, for your 2 years' salary, or you can stop now. We'll give you 1 year's salary. I thought about it, and I thought, well, I'm still enjoying the work, but I've been doing this for a long time now. And so, I felt reasonably good about stopping. I thought, that'll sort of do. So instead of teaching for those 2 years, I retrained as a counsellor. And that's what I do now. I work as a counsellor for Age Concern Manchester, where I am perhaps the only counsellor who's older than many of the clients.
Excellent.
And the other link there, and I almost finished this narrative that you never actually asked for, but is that for the last 25 years of my teaching and teacher education work, the style of work that involved me and intrigued me more and more was based on Carl Rogers' idea that if you can set up the facilitative context appropriately, then people naturally want to grow. They want to find their own way forward. They want their own self-effectiveness to increase. There's a natural tendency for people to become better at who they are. God, you're fast.
Yeah, these things are amazing.
And so the switch over from that into counselling was a very natural thing. It was based on Rogers' client-centered therapy.
Right.
So I shifted first of all, out of the language teaching, but then out of education altogether, really, and into counselling. This is what I do now.
I'm fascinated to know what transfers, what equates between the hat where you are an educator and the hat where you are a counsellor.
There's a great line of Rogers, I think, which is you don't have to be sick in order to get better.
Right.
And that's the crossover part, I think. That the tendency for people to grow and to become what he calls a fully functioning person is something that can be facilitated if you create the correct conditions. And that is as true of someone who's coming along because they have deep personal problems, perhaps because they've just lost a loved one, or perhaps because they've been put out of work and they don't see much meaning in their life anymore, or they're sort of frozen by anxiety about their lives and what's going on in them. It applies to those sort of conditions, but it also applies to the teacher who says, well, here I am in this context working away, but I think I could be doing something a bit more interesting, or maybe I find this part of my work difficult. Why is that? Or maybe they think, well, this is the part of my work I do best. Why am I so successful here? What is it about what I do here? What is it? What are the skills I've got? Why am I so good at this? Because if I could understand that better, maybe I could, transfer those skills somewhere else. In each case, what you're trying to do as the facilitator is to set up the conditions where that kind of self-development becomes possible. And in Roger's terms, as you've realised, I give very long answers to short questions. You can stop me at any point.
Marvelous.
I don't do this when I'm teaching, or I didn't when I was teaching, and I certainly don't when I'm counselling. But as you asked, Rogers stipulated a set of conditions which are facilitative for this kind of self-development or natural growth tendency. And the three most important ones, he said, are, first of all, that the person, the facilitator, ceases to be judgmental, ceases to evaluate, offers respect and understanding without any evaluation. Whatever it is that you're feeling and you're thinking, it's okay to talk about it, and you're not going to be judged for what you say. So again, if you take just some simple examples, and of course they are only simple examples, but if you take the bereaved person who might be thinking, why did that selfish bastard have to die? How am I supposed to get on? How am I supposed to do all these things by myself? You know, it's an emotion that you might have, but you can't say it. But getting yourself into a situation where you, being given a situation where you can say it, where you can get that out, where you can hear it, where you can own it, gives you the chance to walk away from it, gives you the chance to get by.
Yeah.
And again, just flipping to the professional development front. For the teacher to, as a teacher, you can't say, if I know how to teach this. You can't say that. Who are you going to say it to? But if you can create a situation where either one-on-one or among colleagues, it becomes possible to say, I'm damned if I know how to do this. And that can be said without you being judged. You've made it possible for you to learn. Because people will tell you things, there's stuff to know, there's stuff to, and you've also probably created an environment where you can help other people. So, first of all, you want a non-judgmental environment to work in. And then the second of what Roger's called the core conditions is the offering of empathy. So that's to say, it's not only that you offer somebody your respect without judging them. It's also that you try as best you can to sort of get around and see things from their point of view. So I don't just accept that's the way things are for you. I try to get around myself and see why it's like that. Because Rogers would have said, I think, did say that just about everything and everybody is understandable if you know enough about that person and where they come from and what they've been through and why, and how they are. And so offering somebody, if you can say to somebody, oh, so, it looks like this, it seems like this, and they get it, that you're making that effort to see things the way they do, then that can be tremendously facilitative as well. And that business of what I was just describing, when the counselor says to the client, so it's like this, is that right? Have I got it right? You're not asking questions so much as trying to check that you've understood. And by checking that you've understood, that's how you offer this non-judgmental respect and how you demonstrate your empathy. And when you're doing that, there's, again, simplifying slightly, but, let's say there are 3 possible responses. If somebody shows me that they've understood properly where I am, what I'm working on, what I'm struggling with, what I'm trying to be or trying to do, if they show me that and they get it right, not just what I've said, but how I was feeling when I said it, then I'm released to move forward. I say, yeah, that's right, that's just what it's like. And from that, I've got space in front of me to move forward. And if that person, if you use the word reflect for this skill, to say to somebody, okay, so it's like this, is that right? If they reflect back to me what I've said, and they don't get it right, and I think, well, no, I didn't exactly mean. That gives me the chance to clarify exactly what I did mean. And if this person didn't get it right, and they're reasonably good at what they do, the reason they didn't get it right might well be that I wasn't very clear in the first place. So that what I said wasn't, I thought I was expressing it clearly, but perhaps I wasn't. And so this gives me a chance to make it as clear as I possibly can. what it is that's going on in my head. And the most exciting possibility of all is when somebody reflects something back to me that I've said, and I say, yes, that's exactly right. And in seeing what they're showing me, which is what I was a second ago, I realize, but I can do better than that. But no, there's something more. Or no, I can take that further because I get it. That yeah, that's what I said, but there's more to it than that. And then I can explore that. So that's the offering non-judgmental acceptance and offering empathy and encouraging the person to put into words what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And then also at some stage what they're planning, what they want to try to do that might be different from what they've done before. And the thinking there is that, the thinking there is that we have these thoughts whirring around our head, which can be very exciting and can also be oppressive if we never actually sort them out. And when you make that effort to put those thoughts into words, you have to slow them down. You have to slow the thoughts down and, lexify them, put them into words. And in doing that, that demands that you slow them down. And because you want to communicate it to somebody else, that demands that you are clear. And if you're seriously working at this, it also demands that you're honest. And the greater the extent you feel you're being accepted and not judged and empathized with, the more honest it becomes possible to be, because the trust builds up. And so the act of faith almost is that if I explore under those conditions, there's a chance that sometimes I will make a discovery, and that that's useful. And on that discovery, I can base my next step forward. And sorry, I'll just put a marker down. I'll come back to that. The third of Roger's core conditions is what he calls being congruent. Well, I'd love to explain that to you, but I'd have to understand it first. In all fairness, Roger's said different things on different occasions. But it's something to do with, if you want to work in this way, I'll say, if I'm trying to understand you, doing my best to understand you, say whatever you want, you will not be judged, be as honest as you can, let it all out. I'm going to try to understand you, to empathize with you. I will show you what I've understood so we can check if I've got it right. And at the same time, I must be congruent with myself. And that means a number of things. Now, I'm not going to disagree with you, because that would involve judging something that you've said. And I'm not going to disapprove of you, because that would be judgmental. But let me give you an example again. I was working with a client a while back now. He was a guy in his mid-60s, early 60s. He'd been out of work for a few years through sickness. He was never going to get a job again. He was living on benefits. And he said, well, he was optimistic. He was always positive, and he did the lottery twice a week. And one day he was going to come up, and when that lottery ticket come up, he knew exactly what he was going to do. He was going to be on the first flight out to Bangkok, because in Bangkok you get really young girls, they're cheap. So you're sitting there offering your non-judgmental respect and trying to empathize, with this, and yet remain congruent, honest to yourself. And that's a strange line to walk. And it must be the case, of course, that sometimes you have to say, you know what, we can't do this because I can't do it any longer. If this carries on much, I can't do it. But on that particular occasion, I sort of stuck with it. I don't know what was on my face, but I did my best. And after a few weeks of working with this bloke, all this sort of bluster disappeared. And this was all just this macho bluster he was starting with to be this persona he thought he needed to be, you know. And after a while, it all just crumbled away, and he was just this poor, sad, lonely guy who didn't really see, a lot of hope for what was going to happen. And we worked on that, and things got better, and it was, a good experience in the end. But this business of being congruent, honest with yourself, while being non-judgmental, might sometimes, well, some of my colleagues would say that they get to a point where they might have to say, yeah, I'm not really very comfortable with some of the things that you're saying, but yeah, they would find. So that's another angle. What is congruent? Because they would say if you are feeling that turmoil inside and you don't bring it out, then you're not being congruent with yourself or honest with the client. So that's the difficult one, I think. But what congruence mustn't be allowed to do is to disturb the sincerity of the non-judgmental acceptance or the attempt to empathize, I think. It's a question of, there are three terms which exist in co-definition. So I've just tried to talk about them separately, but in fact they all exist as a set, and you have to keep them working as a set.
Yep.
So going back to a question you asked about 15 minutes ago, which I think was to do with what's the overlap between the two, then the overlap is that if you can offer those core conditions, then it can be facilitative both for the troubled person in therapy, but also for the eager, keen, able professional who wants to develop. Because if we just take the second case now, which I've not been talking about so much, but the teacher who wants to talk about changing her teaching, developing her teaching, may at some point come up with an idea which, if it had come up in a conversation or in the staff room, one might have said, oh, don't do that, darling, that'll never work. But in this mode of working, you'd say to yourself, well, the fact that I did this, 20 years ago and it didn't work for me doesn't mean that this person and the way she is doing it now, it won't be the same thing. We're not the same people. And the best teacher she can be is not the best teacher I can be, and vice versa. So you'd want to give people that space to develop their own thinking and offer them the respect and the empathy to do it with.
Brilliant. I'm going to be looking up Carl Rogers.
Do. There are two books. One, which one? Probably A Way of Being, 1980. Yeah. Because that and the earlier book, which to my embarrassment is now going out of my head, because it happens with age, and what can I tell you?
Young age too.
They're a series of papers rather than one long book, and so the effect is cumulative. Some parts are repetitive and some parts are slightly different, but he's not a difficult writer at all.
I'm hearing in this a lot, so part of what I've been studying in the last year are methodologies like existential phenomenology, action research, participatory action research, institutional ethnography, and there are resonances there.
Yes, indeed there are. I think you can, yeah. I mean, those are also fields that I've well, particularly action research, participatory action research. The overlap between that and professional development is very close, it seems to me. And the academic work that I've done is all just about all been in the action research paradigm. So the as a way of sort of supervising researchers, giving them that sort of space to work out for themselves what it is they're trying to do is the way that I've tried to work.
So I'm interested in your encapsulation of what action research is, because I've been reading many different definitions.
Yeah.
And of course, I think it's important to have many different definitions.
Mostly what I've worked with, both myself and with the research that I've supervised, has been individual research rather than team research.
Right.
So that's what it's easiest for me to talk about. But along the same lines you were just saying, by talking about it in this way, I don't mean to disregard or reduce the importance of other forms of research. Yeah. So action research for me starts off with action. That's to say, somebody is working in a certain situation, and in that situation, their attention is drawn to something which interests them. Stereotypically, this is usually conceived as a problem, but it doesn't have to be. I think it's important to say that. I think, as I said before, the teacher's attention might be drawn to, why am I so good at this? why am I, reading class is always so good and my pronunciation class is always so crap? Why is that? And let's look at what I do well and see if I can discover more about it. The important thing is there's a focus. So we've got action, and then there's a focus on some part of this action. And then there's some period of observation of what exactly do I do here? How much detail can I gather about what goes on? And then after that observation, there will be, again, I'm making this sound linear and it's not. So after this observation, there'll be some planning in terms of an intervention, a response to what's going on. And there'll be this intervention, and after that intervention, there'll be more observation of how things are now, and there'll be reflection on what's changed and why it's changed and how it's changed. And then there'll be more planning and another intervention. So we've got these phases of some people start off with observation, but for me, I like to start off with action. That's because that focuses on the fact that the researcher is also the actor in the environment, as distinct from the researcher who comes in from outside. The action research that interests me and I've worked with is by the insider in the situation. So out of action arises, so there's focus of interest, observation of that. We get observation, we get reflection, we have planning, we have action, and it's not linear. They're all mixing up together all the time. But this goes around a number of loops until, if we're talking about some sort of formal piece of research, of course, you've got to produce a document. You've got to produce a dissertation or a thesis or a paper or something, but as a way of life, it can go on and it can shoot off into a different sort of a loop because of something else that you've discovered. while doing this, or you might get so far with the focus of interest in the question you started off with, and think, okay, yeah, that's interesting. I've done enough of that. Now where am I going? And informal, it becomes a way of life. It's a way of being, to use Roger's phrase again. And yeah, that's my take on it. There was something else I wanted to say there about the. Yeah, it's gone.
Well, I'd like to know what you love about teaching, about education, about learning. What lights it up for you?
Um, Let me just download one line that I've said to a lot of people over the years, some of whom have been shocked, which is don't ever love your job because it'll never love you back. Um, when I started my sort of autobiographical narrative, I said I found what I was trying to do fascinating, and I did. And a part of what's kept me involved in this is that fascination, that the fact that one set of experiences raises a question which you try to answer, and that takes you into a slightly different place, but another question always comes up, is what's kept me at it. But of course, I can't say if that's really anything to do with teaching or not. As far as I know, I might have gone into banking and found the same thing, so I don't know if that's because it's teaching. Can't say.
Yeah.
Do you know that lovely story? Can't resist. Lovely story about Ray Charles was once asked, Mr. Charles, what influence do you think has had on your music that you were born poor and blind and black? To which he replied, I don't know. Never grew up any other way. So whether that was to do with teaching or not, I don't know. There is, on the emotional side, when you see with all due humility that you've had a role in somebody getting something or doing something or becoming something, then there's a tremendous satisfaction in that. There's a real buzz in that. And that probably occurs more in teaching than in other fields because, for goodness sake, that's what you're trying to do all the time. But again, I'm sure you could be a carpenter and still get the same buzz of seeing somebody get something that was important to you and you help them get it. And so these are, emotional, intellectual and emotional experiences that have sustained me in teaching. Whether it's because it's teaching or not, I don't know.
I think that's a really good point. For me, teaching, learning is distributed, it's diffuse, it's throughout all our lives.
Yes, yes.
Throughout all our relationships. I see it as one of the things we do. And whether it's a carpenter, a roofer, a dancer, a banker, maybe.
Yes. Well, yeah, stretch our imagination. I'm dying. The whole idea of there's the carpenter philosopher. I find very, very attractive. That there's no reason why you shouldn't.
Yeah. So I recall at Dave Hall's talk, Brilliant, brilliant evening. And he was talking about Swazant Wheaters.
Yes, indeed he was. That's right. Yes. Yes. Now, what was that? Yes. Okay. What was it about? Can you remember?
Yes, so 1968.
Yeah.
In Paris, there's students.
What was his point, though? What was he? Yeah. What was he? He was putting him down, wasn't he? He was saying,
Well, I got the he was referred to as we went to a conference, and somebody looked at him and said, "Well, you're a Swazant Wheater, aren't you?" Uh, and it was a reference to
Paris in '68.
Progressive attitudes to education.
Yeah.
And also placing him alongside this student revolt in 1968 in Paris. But then the sort of cascaded out of that lots of histories, the various questions and answers, and sit-ins in universities. And I'd like, if I recall correctly, you said that you had sat in on a university.
I was in Paris in 1968. Yes, right. I wasn't throwing cobblestones at anybody. But
could you just flesh out some of that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember now exactly
from your perspective.
Exactly what was going on there. I think one thing I think I said and would say is that it is possible to live in the educational world and I mean that the academic as well as the professional at university in the university environment and hold certain views and publish one's papers and write one's books following certain lines of thought and being dismissive of lines of educational thought that one disapproves of. I mean, classically, Michael Gove's educational approach of the first Cameron administration. And to go on writing this stuff in parallel to what's actually happening historically in our schools. That's to say, parallel in the sense of they never touch. You know? Parallel lines that extend off to infinity and don't touch. And I think I used the word intellectual masturbation at the time. So in one sense, there's that going on. But what I am saying there is also very unkind in the sense that it is important that people, important to me, important in my estimation, that people keep such traditions and such possibilities alive in the face of the, I would say, less than fortunate directions that education has gone in terms of the alignment of education more and more to the servicing of capital. That it's one thing to say, you know, you've got to get your education so you can get a good job. That's a healthy sort of an attitude, and parents would all think that of their children, probably in various ways of putting it. But if we assume that the workers of the time were taught to write and add up, because the owners of capital needed more people to count their profits, which is sort of the position that I hold. Yet there was, and I'm not a great education historian, and so I'm sure I can be called to rights on many of the things I'm about to say, but it seems to me that through institutions such as the Works Education Association, the WEA, through the trades union movement, through the post-secondary, well, the whole beverage, National Health Service education bill of the mid-20th century, there was what might have been a direction which has been lost. There was a historical window into which I was massively fortunate enough to have been born, where the child of two manual labourers could just follow a path of education for the sake of education and study what interested you. And, to come out of school in Stoke and decided you want to study the Middle East. And the government, will give you taxpayers' money to do it. Now, maybe it sounds frivolous, but it's made an interesting life to me. And it seems to me that's very different than as I say, the reduction of education only to the servicing of capital. What must people learn in order to be employed, also in the sense of used, employed most effectively to increase the profit of capital, which I think is the direction that we've shifted into since the 1980s, and it's sad to see, the effects in schools and in universities of the bartering off of value for price. Which is why I've come to refer to large areas of my work over the years as fighting the long defeat, which I think is a perfectly honourable way to spend one's life. Fighting the long defeat. As degree inflation, grade inflation. The need for profits to be made in smaller and smaller cost centres, so that the smaller the cost centre you can demand a profit to be made, the easier it becomes to get rid of that whole area of activity because it's not making a profit, rather than having some things that might be thought worthwhile covered by profits being made in other areas. This kind of thing. So probably what was going on that was what Dave was talking about was engaging those sort of thoughts and memories and feelings that I had. I as I say, I was born in 48. I was 20 in 68. So I come out of that historical period, and it was formative.
So yeah, so the culture in Perth was the closest I've come is watched the film The Dreamers. I'm afraid and Dave's talk was a whirlwind history that really lit up parts of my brain, my fascination, and
you see, I mean, it was that whole period was. In many people's eyes, completely laughable, But the whole hippie thing, the whole tune in, turn on, drop out, the whole.
what fruited in it then?
A dark answer to that, I think, would be the same realization that we got in 2008, 2009, that the money does not belong to us, we belong to the money. The Greeks at the moment going through that experience worse than any other European country. That this idea that there is one fundamental law, I believe, in our society, which is capital must make profit. Everything else is subjected to that. So that while, as long as capital can be seen to be making profit, it will continue. If they get so greedy that things go wrong, then the state will have to step in with our money and bail out the people who have now made a loss so that they can go back to making a profit, and we pick up the tab. What happened, I think, for me as the 60s turned into the 70s was the realization that the ideas and the dreams and the possibilities that we'd seen could also be commercialized and bought up and bought out and sold back to us at a profit. And so in a sense, I think it was the same lesson again, just coming at you from a slightly different perspective.
Wow. I recall you saying one of the realizations from his talk was that you can't, if you're going to encounter a problem, you can't come at it on the same level as it. You have to go up level.
Yes,
if I recall.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. That's Gregory Bateson. Steps to an Ecology of Mind is the book, which I find just a bit unreadable. I've tried to read it so many times. But that's systems thinking. That, but I do find that really. Can I give you an example of that?
Please, yeah.
Because I remember at Manchester University, just before I left, one of our senior research professors was giving a talk about the kind of, in order to be relevant, the kind of areas that we need to be involved in researching. One of which was truancy. And he said in passing that he'd been in Hong Kong recently, talking to people at the University of Hong Kong there. And it took quite some time for him to explain the concept of truancy because it wasn't anything that they experienced, or what do you mean they don't go to school, And so it was really important for us to be investigating this phenomenon. And that seemed to me to be a classic of this kind of misunderstanding. That because we have truancy in education, in order to address that problem, we should start, it was our responsibility as educators to work out, why this was happening and what we could do to stop it. Whereas it seemed to me transparently the case that if you said to the great British public, what you need to do is to behave the same way that the citizens of Hong Kong do, to respect rules and authority the same way that the citizens of Hong Kong do, to do what your government tells you in exactly the way the citizens of Hong Kong do, and you know what? We won't have any truancy. In other words, you've got to go to that level to address the problem. If you come at it at the school level, suddenly, it's the teacher's fault, or it's the headmaster's fault, or it's the... But that's not where that can be addressed. It's a social issue, not an educational issue as such. And that's this business. If you can't address it at the level at which you meet it, you've got to go up into the bigger context and see what's happening here.
I recall reading Gregory Bateson about the double bind.
All right.
And is it learning 3? And the only way you can get somebody beyond the double bind is to go up.
Can you remember exactly what he meant by double bind?
double bind where is it a no-win situation?
I think so. Yes, where if you go this way to solve that problem, you run into this one, and yes,
The devil in the deep blue sea, the
yeah.
out of the frying pan
And-
into the fire.
And so again, you need to go to a higher contextual level to see how they can be presented. And in terms of thinking, I think it ties in with Piaget, sort of. I think, when he talks about assimilation and accommodation, that's to say, we've got ways of understanding the world in there. And here's a simple example that works for me anyway, that if you're a kid and you see a sparrow and somebody tells you it's a bird, and then you see a magpie and somebody tells you it's a bird, and then you see a crow and somebody tells you it's a bird, and somebody tells you a robin says it's a bird, your schema of what a bird is cool, And so when you get another one, you can assimilate it. And then one fine day, you see a penguin swimming through the sea. Somebody tells you, hey, sort of a bird. You can't assimilate that into your schema. You have to accommodate. The schema has to change in order to accommodate this new information. And I think that there's an overlap between that and what Bateson's saying in terms of the kind of shift of learning that you need to take place sometimes, where you need to not only go on learning extra bits of information in the same way, but rank shift up again. Maybe to learn about what it is that you're learning about, or learn how it is that you're learning, or somehow make a bigger shift. But like I say, I found Bateson very difficult.
Do you have a recommendation on Piaget for me to go and read? Is there a particular book that sticks out?
No, I don't. I would. I would look for one of those tiny little paperbacks, introduction to books.
Right, yeah.
And read one of them. Or go into Wikipedia and read a couple of pages of that and then see what goes from there. This is what I would do.
I will do.
Honestly.
Something I like to ask everyone, because it's a fascinating factor of our lives, is that what are your thoughts on the paperworks and the bureaucracies that you encounter when you're trying to achieve your job? Are they helpful? Do they assist you? Oh, yeah, just that general area. What?
Paperwork, bureaucracy, in the sense of university.
Yeah. What you've encountered, I guess.
That's a vexed question. Excuse me for a moment, just to check my watch.
Yes.
We're fine. Excellent. I don't have a general answer to that. I'm going to give you a couple of specific responses to
Please.
because it has been said, and I believe it may well be true, one of the worst preparations for becoming an academic is to start off as a teacher, because that is not the path. The path of the successful academic is to do with your research, your publications, your down that line. and for some people, the teaching is the barge you have to tug in order to be able to proceed down the path. And for others, it's not. They enjoy their teaching, and for those people who can really keep those two in balance, then they are tremendous to work with. For those of us who were probably more teachers than academics, then the fact that what we wanted to write never got the respect that we thought it might deserve was always a bit of a pain, and that's and those people who didn't respect it would probably say, well, you shouldn't be in the bloody university in the first place. Maybe that's true. So in terms of paperwork, I know one's writing isn't really paperwork, but that was just something that came to mind. Mm-hmm. So it was always very satisfying to get out of the university into other environments of working somewhere else for a while, or conference environments where you met your own people who were interaction research, for instance, people who lived on that borderland between, well, in that area I call praxis, and meet with those people. That was always sustaining. But taking another example of what some colleagues saw as frustrating paperwork, I thought they were, well, there was a situation where the university came very close to legal action against it in terms of ethical practice in a certain faculty, the name of which could not be dragged from me, but it wasn't education. And so there was a great, we need more ethical control of the research that's being done. And so these voluminous forms were produced that had to be filled in before anybody could do any research. And because they emanated from this particular area that had been problematic, they were keyed to that area and were frequently just irrelevant or obstructive to work that other people were trying to do. And so a number of members of staff saw this as something to be avoided if at all possible, or brushed aside, which then left the students that they were supervising swinging slightly in the wind, because these things had to be done. The forms had to be filled in. Then they had to go forward to be approved at the school level or faculty level. And if they hadn't been filled in properly, then they would come bouncing back to be done again. And then the students' research would be delayed. And then the supervisors would say, oh, it's these bloody forms getting in the way of the research being done. And I found myself saying, actually, no. It's because you didn't make the effort to make sure that what needed to be done did need to be done. And if research is not ethical, what is it? Ethics is the only place research can start. It can't start anywhere else. And so I was engaged in a battle on the one hand, because I opened my mouth, I got drafted into this role, trying to get some colleagues, to take this more seriously and make sure it was done early. And at the other end, trying to get the forms themselves changed to be more relevant and more flexible to the actual needs of the various participants. And the bureaucratic load of that was huge and wasteful of lots of time and effort and goodwill. And yet getting it right was important. There was a job that had to be done. It was a pity it was done the way it was, perhaps, but So that's one response to that.
It's complex, and it's good to hear a complex response to it. And these things filter into everybody's lives practically.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's I this is my way of expanding my own sense of awareness. um, and so I'm conscious of time, but I'd like to know what you would like other people to understand about what you do. It's,
It's a good question. It's very interesting that I'll tell you what my first response was to that. Um, although I'll probably want to retreat from it, but let me get it out. It is that I don't mind. I don't mind. I feel. Oh, it's really interesting that was the response. That's what I felt. That I probably move. I've moved on. I'm past it. I'm over the hill. The baton has passed. There's lots of people out there in their 30s and 40s and 50s doing this sort of stuff, and they will. It would be nice to think that that one or two over the next few years, before I'm completely outdated, will come across some of those bits on action research and professional development, and offshoots like reflective practice and reflexivity and this sort of thing, and think, oh, that's interesting. That would be nice. Um, there's a website called Cooperative Development, which I've said I'll do a ragged session in October.
Great.
Which is going to be around that sort of work, which will be about the sort of thing I've been talking about the role of non-judgmental discourse and a way of being and that sort of thing. I would. Yeah, it'd be great if people. I've been singing that song for so long. That'd be nice if one or two people had picked it up and thought, yeah, the use of non-judgmental language as a way of helping us develop ourselves and understand each other better, and therefore make space for a bit of plurality. It'd be nice if one or two people picked up some of that from some of the stuff I've done and written.
Really, really. And just to finish off, because a person is a universe.
Save one person, save the whole world.
So you've seen Ragged University, and I hope you've got a flavour of it. Is there anything you'd like to see it stretch and move into as an organism, as a community, as a thing?
I don't feel qualified. I think the idea is wonderful, and the little I've seen of the practice seems so worthwhile. The closer that we can get, but don't push on who that we is. For me, the closer that we can get to demonstrating in our practice, in the way that we are, that really interesting ideas are not difficult to understand and do not require complex language to get a hold of, and are truly available to just about anybody. The closer we could get to that, I guess, the happier I would be. We're back to the carpenter philosopher, the idea that ideas belong to everybody, and the fact that they're separated out into institutions is so poisonous and sets up the potential for a sort of a dual snobbery. The reverse snobbery and that is such a pity. And the way that some people who purvey ideas use an unnecessarily complicated language to do so is such a pity. But as I say, it works both ways. And so I suppose for me that the potential of something like the WEA again, in which the workers say, this is ours, and educated themselves and took possession. The great, oh, sorry, it's got a crown. Muscle spasm from that. The greater to the extent, that could be facilitated would be a wonderful thing, I think. People talking about interesting ideas in everyday language and encouraging people to join in with that discussion. Just fall into politics too much, but if one side of politics is based on the idea of individual greed, then individual greed is pretty well established. You don't need to explain it or teach people about it or argue for it. Whereas if you want to put forward policies which are based on something else, then you need to be involved in educating the people to understand what the options are. And the classic extent to which the Labour Party has failed to engage in that education of the electorate is why it finds itself where it is. And the greater the extent towards in which it moves towards policies based on individual greed, the greater the loss.
Julian, thank you very much.
I talked a lot more than I do.
What a pleasure.
Thanks very